My name is Greg Foss. I'm a senior cybersecurity strategist with VMware Carbon Black. And today I want to talk with you all about eCrime industrialization and what that really means to you as defenders. So cybercrime totals are estimated to be 1.5 trillion in revenue annually. Now, this is based on a report that Atlas VPN put together towards the end of last year. When you put companies like Tesla, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, kind of all together, these big, heavy-hitting companies that we're all aware of and we use their services, their annual revenues do not reach $1.5 trillion. So it's an insane amount of money that these groups are pulling in, and it's not slowing down anytime soon. This is actually estimated to increase up to $6 trillion over the next 5 years. Now, one of the most common attacks that we've seen, especially all over the news recently, is ransomware. And now, not even just traditional ransomware anymore, but more commonly, we're seeing groups shift to adopting the ransomware double extortion tactic. Now, traditional ransomware is still a nightmare to deal with for any organization. The double extortion component of this adds an extra level of kind of fear to the equation here, in terms of the data is not just locked up on your system. They actually have removed this from the environment, essentially exfiltrated this out of the organization before they've encrypted the systems within the environment. So assuming that you have the ability to recover from a ransomware attack, restore all of your data from backups and things of that nature, well, either way, they have stolen your most sensitive information. Now, they take a kind of different approach to their initial infection vectors and attack techniques as well. Oftentimes, these groups are much more hands-on. They'll gain access through items such as exposed remote desktop protocol services, through password guessing and general kind of spray and pray sort of approaches. They will also still use phishing, but often not to just deploy a single ransomware payload, but often to gain access to that system so they can begin mapping out the organization, understand where items of interest might be located, and figure out how they can move those out of the environment. Now, adding on to this, another significant component that has shifted the landscape pretty substantially is ransomware as a service. And this falls into the category of general malware as a service, where you can purchase access to a command and control server that you actually have a licensed access to use, and you can generate your payloads from it. And it's all managed and maintained by the ransomware gang that's running this operation, but you can leverage their services for a fee. And they, of course, will get a percentage of those profits as well. And so that's one we've seen kind of exploding in popularity and really changing the game in terms of making it easy for individuals who maybe don't have the technical experience necessary to pull off one of these attacks themselves. As long as they have funding and they're able to go purchase cryptocurrencies, they're able to rent a ransomware as a service application. Looking at ransomware in general, this is just data from the last year, but essentially when we map out kind of all of the ransomware variants that we analyze through our various sensors, when we look at the new modular approach that ransomware has to their attacks, you can see this is really changing kind of how ransomware is able to operate and how they can add and modify a lot of the tooling to suit their needs in these various different attack scenarios. For example, one of the most common ones we see now is the disablement of Microsoft's anti-malware scan interface, because this gives some in-depth visibility into PowerShell activities that are happening in memory. So if they can take those eyes and ears out of the security tooling, they can try and bypass security tools such as your endpoint tools and things of that nature. Then it allows their malware to stick and actually execute, and then they can do a lot more in a much more unfettered manner. Because when we look at the outcome of these attacks and kind of where this data ends up, it goes across various cybercrime markets, which really turns into an assembly line of sorts. And it's all based around opportunity. So the more opportunistic availability of these services and these systems, the easier it is to gain access to, the more likely it is to be pilfered and shared and sold online. So as we move down this chain, we have the individuals making the malware, and then we have the individuals hosting the services, running infrastructure, such as bulletproof hosting. Then we have operators, and the operators can be the groups themselves. They could be individuals renting services. They could be individuals that are selling access to these individuals that are running these services. And it's really more like a modern business than anything else. Now, what do the marketplaces look like? Well, this is an example of a pretty popular Russian crimeware forum called exploit.in. The one I really want to focus on here is actually this access component. And this is a trend we've seen over the past couple years become increasingly popular. And this is initial access brokerage. Essentially, this is where individuals will gain access to a target organization, map them out, and then just directly sell access on various crimeware forums to these businesses. Now, we saw this years ago with purchasing access to one-off home user systems and things like that, specifically for those proxy components and being able to hide your traces through some of these other systems. But now it's just full on gaining access to organizations, mapping them out, placing a dollar value, and then offering it up for sale on the crimeware forums. Now, one of these examples here, this is essentially an individual selling access to a United States government center, and for a price of 3 Bitcoin. So at today's cost, we're looking at like $160,000, $170,000. Back when this was posted, I'd imagine this was like $60,000 to $80,000. Still quite a bit of money, but you're looking at a very juicy target that they're trying to sell access to here. Now, this is one of the interesting ones, right? Like most of them we're going to see are going to be kind of like this, where they're much lower dollar values, something that a lot more people are more likely to purchase. Someone's much more likely to spend $1,000 on access to a small locksmith company or an insurance group or something like that than they are to spend hundreds of $1,000s and possibly even just get scammed in that process. One interesting thing here I did want to highlight is this individual selling multiple different organizations they've compromised and mapped out. And once you engage in discussions with them, they'll fill you in on some of these details about the company and things like that. But one interesting thing here is they know that multi-factor is enabled in this company, but they actually have instructions for bypassing the MFA solution that's in use. Now, some of their targets, when we look at kind of just who's most commonly hit by some of these attacks, number one was retail. And then shortly after that was financial services and financial technology. But the one I really want to highlight here that I think is very interesting is technology companies. And this isn't just for the technology company itself, although often that is one of their main goals. But one of the targets we saw hit most commonly or most prominently was technology companies that have access into other companies, thinking managed service providers and folks who maybe have credentials to various other companies. That's going to be a very juicy target for them to gain access to. And that's why they go for a much higher dollar value on average than some of the other industry verticals that we see targeted by these groups. Now, drilling down, taking a step further, we want to look at the type of access that's for sale. Remote desktop protocol, of course, is going to be number one. Because oftentimes companies will have these exposed RDP servers, and they might not have multi-factor in place. So it's an easy target for them to gain that initial access, but also once they've gained that access to prop that up so that they can sell that access back into that company. So on average, Digital Shadows, this is from the same report actually, said that was going for a little over $9,500 on average. Now, couple that with the domain administrative rights. If you can get in and all of a sudden you essentially have God mode on the network, add on about another $8,000 to that cost. And so, that's going to be something where it makes it infinitely more lucrative for both the buyer and the seller in these environments. If you have this exposed service, you can just log in from the internet, and right away when you get in, you can gain domain admin rights. Oftentimes they'll give you either the credentials for that, or it'll be essentially something that is, or it'll be the account that you actually purchase access to is the domain admin account. Now, the next one I found real interesting is the direct sale of access through VPN concentrators. Traditionally, this is going to be looking at, if they have credentials to it, if they have a backup VPN service that maybe doesn't have multi-factor authentication enabled, or most recently, the exploits against VPN services directly. A lot of criminal groups will monitor various target organizations, and when a prominent vulnerability is disclosed for a VPN service that a company might be leveraging, they can go ahead and leverage that exploit to gain direct access to the VPN, and then use that to pivot into the network, gain additional credentials, and move throughout the environment. Now, as we move down the chain, we see some of these other sort of types of access that are less prolific. The one that I think is kind of interesting here is the computer management system, specifically because of what we saw with SolarWinds. Gaining access to a system like that, basically you have keys to the kingdom, network configurations, credentials, and everything else therein. So it's surprising to see those go for such a low dollar value versus general remote desktop protocol. But I'm guessing that's due to just the sort of clientele that's going after these services. Now, to highlight just kind of how profitable some of this can be and how essentially prolific these activities are, I want to talk about the invisible god, essentially an individual that goes by the name of Andrei Turchin from Kazakhstan, whose most prominent alias is FXMSP, which you might have read about in the news, because this individual is the one who famously compromised three prominent antivirus vendors and was selling their source code and then direct access into the company on various crime war forums. Now, this individual was eventually caught and arrested, and it was actually shortly after the attack against the antivirus companies. So I'm willing to bet he kind of poked the wrong bear in this scenario, and that was what ended up getting him caught. But you can see his general MO was very basic, doing remote desktop protocol scans and password sprays. And then once he gained access, he would try and backdoor the backup servers themselves. And then he would also exfiltrate a lot of data for personal use and for resale as well. And overall, they estimate that he was able to compromise 135 companies across 44 different countries and estimated to have made over $1.5 million that they're aware of. Now, in general, there's a lot we could do and we could really dig into here in terms of preventing this sort of activity. But the main one I want to focus on is some data that came out from our 2021 Global Cybersecurity Outlook report. And this is one that we were super happy to see. And this is organizations are starting to stand up threat hunting programs. And what was really unique about this is this wasn't just a survey that we asked individuals within security. We asked general CIOs and CSOs and others across kind of the spectrum within IT about what they're doing within their organizations. And we were very happy to see that 81% of organizations actually have official threat hunting programs now. All the threats we talked about earlier, kind of the crimeware ecosystem and how all of this kind of operates, really comes down to knowing your environment and setting aside some of this dedicated time to doing proactive threat hunting. You really want to give your security operations team time to hunt through this data, because it's not always going to be just an alert that pops up and says, hey, like you're being attacked. You really want to take what you know about your environment and go apply that to proactive hunting. And the more organizations are able to do that, the more successful we're all going to be as an industry. It's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of what we can do to stay ahead of these threats. I mean, really, like these groups are very opportunistic. So all you have to be is more secure than your next neighbor over. So really focus on starting that proactive threat hunting. Don't just wait for alerts to come through, and focus on expanding your defensive capabilities based on what you find out from these threat hunts, based on what you know about your organization, and based on what you know about how you need to protect your organization's most sensitive assets. So with that, I want to thank you all very much again for joining us, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns, and look forward to seeing you at the next one.